Welcome to the Resiliency of the Human Spirit podcast, where we share all about human triumphs for the collective's healing and empowerment. I am your host, Priscilla Hanley. My guest today is Michelle Steiner. Michelle lives with an invisible disability. She works as a paraeducator in a school for students with disabilities. She has articles published on a number of different platforms, such as the Mighty Nonverbal Learning Project, Dyscalculia Blog, the Reluctant Spoonie, Kalopina Collective, Imagine the World as One magazine, and Word Gathering. She is also an avid photographer. Her photographs were featured in Word Gathering, Independent, and Work Ready. Michelle lives in Pennsylvania with her husband and 2 cats. Without further ado, I'll bring Michelle on right now. Hey, Michelle.
Priscilla.
How I like your background. It's so bright. So thank you for the splash of beautiful colors today.
Oh, thank you. I put this up in winter time because it was kind of cold and dreary, and I thought, okay, I'm going to brighten it up a little bit.
Yeah, it's beautiful. So I'm
Yeah.
so happy you're here today. We connected, I want to say 2 or 3 months ago, where you shared your personal story with me. And I am so honored to be here with you today because you have a very empowering story and you are really a wonderful example of resilience. So I will just jump right in and ask you to share your story on your life journey and with your invisible disability and how you navigated that journey.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Yes.
Thank you.
I was diagnosed with a learning disability whenever I was in kindergarten. Whenever I first started school, my teacher saw that I was really struggling in the classroom. I was struggling academically, and I was also struggling socially. Things like trying to tie my shoes were really difficult for me. Anything with numbers, that was really hard. And I can remember she recommended to my parents that I get tested for having a learning disability. And I was my parents' first child, so they didn't have a lot to base development on. But of course, they consented for me to get tested. And sure enough, I have one. And whenever I was diagnosed at that age, it was a specific learning disability. It was more of an umbrella term, but they knew I was not going to be a math genius at age 5. And after my diagnosis, I had to repeat kindergarten the following year in a different school in our district. It was still a public school, but I had to go to a different one. I began to receive specialty services in all areas, and math, reading, and I also had accommodations such as having a test read aloud to me and extra time on tests. And it was really difficult those early years. I went to a very small school district, and everybody knew everyone. And I couldn't hide the fact I had a disability, and that made me stick out like a sore thumb. So the bullying started really early. And academically, it was hard in all areas, but especially math. And eventually they saw that I could read really well. And I was put into regular ed, science, and social studies, and a little bit of reading. And eventually I was in all regular ed classes except for math and science. Well, no, I'm not science, except for math. And I had a resource room. And I can remember school got easier for me. My grades improved. Socially, it got a lot harder. Had more defined peer groups, and I just didn't feel like I fit in with anybody. So that became an issue. And one of the things I started to do is I hung out with some kids that were in a nearby neighboring school district in an art program, and I found acceptance with that. And after that group stopped meeting, that encouraged me to reach out to other groups in our community. And I found an adult writing group, and we still meet 20 some years later every month, and we're in each other's lives. And it's just been amazing. Academically, though, I knew that I wanted to go on to the main challenge became, what do I want to do after I'm done with high school? And I can remember I knew I wanted to go to college, but I was afraid, and I wasn't alone in those fears. I had a learning support teacher who said, well, I don't think you can go to college. And she suggested trade school. Well, nothing at trade school really interested me. So I got involved with an agency called Office for Vocational Rehabilitation. And they said, okay, community college, yeah, that's great. You could have accommodations, and a lot of places will look at how well you did at a community college. So I got signed up, and right before though, I could receive services, I had to get tested for having a learning disability all over again. And I've never been a great test taker. And my scores were so low that a psychiatrist told me I was most likely not going to go beyond a community college. And I get to community college, and there's a big stigma that surrounds disability accommodations. Some people thought they were cheating. And I had a professor that told me, well, you're going to have limited job choices because of your math. And I was really discouraged. And I thought, well, I'm not going to use accommodations. And that was a really big mistake. My grades dropped even more. And everybody was telling me, well, you can do better. And finally, I had a professor, I was in her class, I was really struggling. And she said, let's at least get you extra time for tests. And once I did that, I passed her class, did not do well, but I passed it. And I was able to graduate with an associate's degree in early childhood education. I moved out on my own, which was great because I'm not able to drive because of my disability. And I loved having my independence and having an apartment. And I was working some temp jobs, but I always wanted more for myself. And I guess be careful what you wish for, because that wish did end up coming true. For financial reasons, I had to move back in with my parents. And it was during that time my job was downsizing. And I thought, this is the time to go back to school. And I found the perfect program at university. It had disability accommodations. I was interested in it, and it had the least amount of math and science possible. And when I went into that, I knew to use the accommodations, and I knew to advocate for myself. And when I did that, it was such a better experience for me. I was able to make Dean's List first semester. My grades improved. And there was always that stigma that surrounded them, but I learned to silence that and just be able to focus on what I needed to do. And I graduated with a bachelor's degree despite being told I couldn't do it. And after school, it took me a little while to find the right job. I work today as a paraeducator in a school. And I also got that courage to write about having a learning disability. One of my dear friends told me, you should really write about having a learning disability. And my writing group, and I was like, oh, I don't know. And I think I wrote some bad poetry and some other stuff I would not want to read today. But when I finally got the courage after I met my husband and we got married and we moved into our home, I couldn't unlock the door. And there was a prompt on the Mighty about what's a seemingly easy task for other people, but it's really hard with your disability. And I wrote about that. And I'll never forget just that feeling when I got published, and how many people have said, hey, that's my story, or I struggle with that too. And that encouraged me to write other articles and eventually be able to start my own blog called Michelle's Mission, where I write about life with a learning disability and do a lot of nature metaphors. And I also do a lot of photography. Because I can't drive, I'll be in the car with my husband and I'll say, did you see that? And he'll be like, no, I'm focused on the road. And sometimes I get that chance to go back and take a picture of a flower or something else in nature. And people will say, you bring out details that I would miss. And I could be sad, but if I was driving, I would miss so many details.
That's true. Yeah. You got to focus on the road, right?
Right.
So, yeah, so much to unpack here. So, let me ask you this. I'm curious, how many different kinds of learning disabilities are there?
They come in a wide range and variety. We have dyslexia, which a lot of people are familiar with, which is a language-based one where students, some of them just can't get how words will sound. We also have some speech and language, some other ones where students really struggle with that. There's dyscalculia, the one that I have. There's dysgraphia that involves writing. And it's not just having poor handwriting. Sometimes people who have it, I mean, everybody will experience it differently, but they might have trouble forming their ideas and sentences. So that can be one. ADHD was never considered one, but now that kind of falls into that umbrella with having a learning disability. Visual perception, which is another thing that I have as well, can fall into that. And it's not with the eyes, it's with your brain and how you process the visual information that you're seeing.
Mm-hmm.
It can affect your eye-hand coordination, and it can even affect hand dexterity. I have limited hand dexterity as an additional condition with having that, and it affects my fine motor skills. And essentially, what learning disabilities are is your brain is wired differently.
Mm-hmm.
And in order to be able to learn and to live, you need to find different ways to be able to do things.
Right. And so again, another question,
Mhm.
can learning disabilities be somehow resolved as somebody grows older? Now they talk about the brain having neuroplasticity, right? Where you can create new neurons and all that stuff. So I'm just wondering, can learning disabilities be resolved?
Learning disabilities, once a person has one, they'll always have one. There is some studies being done with neuroscience where they can figure some different ways to be able to change that. But a person I will always have dyscalculia, but there are strategies people can use to help themselves to be able to do that. And sometimes it's not that the person can't learn, it's just a matter of finding a way to be able to do that. My dad always tells me, I think you could learn math if somebody found the right way to teach you.
Ah,
And but there has not been any effective strategies with that. But there are ways you can help yourself. But someone that has one will always have a disability like that, and that's okay.
right, absolutely. And you
Mhm.
talked about the strategies. Can you share a little bit about what you mean with strategies, coping
Sure.
strategies?
Whenever I go to school or if I'm in a class, if I would decide to go back to school, I need to have extended test time so my brain is able to process information a lot better. I've also had the test read aloud to me when I was in all 12 years of school, and sometimes just hearing it helps me out. Sometimes, yeah, because you'll have this. I had a student the other day that was like, "Can you read these directions to me? I don't understand what they mean." And I read them out loud, and he understood what they meant after that.
Right,
And I also had a note taker. My handwriting is affected with having one, so it's not that great. So that was one thing that really saved. If someone was studying with me, they could read somebody else's handwriting a lot better. And that was one thing. And also it can be really hard sometimes to even copy notes down from the board too. Sometimes students aren't really effective with doing that. Your brain's trying to keep up with the professor who's lecturing, and you're trying to copy notes, and that can be
right,
really hard to be able to do that. But other ways I have found, we also did calculator usage on tests. Now, that has not always been very effective because if you don't understand how to do the procedure, a calculator is not, I still got the answer wrong.
right.
But, and then in my everyday life, it involves, I'll take my phone out if I have to calculate a tip for the tip calculator. I also, if I'm in public and I'm at the store, I never know how much we're spending. It's always a surprise when I get to the register. But and if you give me a credit card or a debit card, that's so abstract that I spend more. But if you give me $20, I can visualize the dollars and everything, and I have a range which I can spend. If I can't drive, I have a great support system. My husband's able to take me to work, and I have a very nice coworker who takes me home
Oh,
at the end of the
nice.
day. I'm able to also walk to where I need to go as well. And I'm not able to read an analog clock, so I have my Fitbit or my phone with me, and just other little things like I could never use a manual can opener, but I can use an electric one. And there's bottle openers and jar openers and just a lot of different things that can help.
Right. And what did you learn about yourself from having a learning disability? How has it served you in your life?
It has really served me to be empathetic towards other people. I remember being a small child wondering, well, what good is ever going to come out of this disability? I thought it's never going to, my life is never going to work out and it's always going to be hard. And what that has taught me, though, is I get that chance now when I work with students to tell them it does get better and it's okay to have a disability. And I think if I didn't go through that, I think I would always want to go towards jobs to help people, but I wouldn't be able to emphasize. I wouldn't understand what somebody else is feeling when they go through that.
Interesting. And you previously talked about your professors saying that, oh, you're not going to get a good job because you can't do math and all that stuff, very negative talk. So I just want to ask you, with society imposing self-limiting beliefs and
Mhm.
thoughts on you, like you can't do this versus you can, how about you try, right? How did these limiting beliefs that your professors placed on you, how did that affect your mindset and how did you navigate that in life?
I was very negative for a long time. I think I spent a great deal of my 20s being very negative, very hard on myself and very hard on other people too. And I was just really afraid. And everybody was telling me, well, just think positively. And I'm like, well, thinking positively isn't necessarily going to cure the disability. But what really has helped me is it's so much more empowering when I focus on what I can do and what I can control and what brings me joy than if I focus on the things that I'm not able to do and that I don't enjoy doing. I love being able to take pictures of flowers and I love to be able to write and reading. And when I do and connect with other people, and when I do that, I'm happy. But when I'm trying to figure out a math problem or doing something that I just, it's hard, then I feel a lot more negative and it's just, I don't feel as joyful. So I think whenever I went back to school, it wasn't just, oh, I have to get a bachelor's degree in what everybody thinks I should do or something that's really hard and prove it. It was, I need to make some really wise decisions here. Is this program going to empower me? Is this program something I can do? And I've had to do that with jobs too. A
Mm.
lot of people thought I was picky about that, but I really wanted to make sure when I went into a position that I could either do the job or have an accommodation that they could have me be able to do it.
That's great advice. I like that. Focus on what brings you joy every day. And so now I want to ask you, what about some misconceptions about learning disabilities that you wish to clarify for the collective today?
Sure. A lot of people will tell me when I tell them I have a learning disability, they say, well, you don't look like you're disabled. And people can't see my learning disability. They can start to see maybe some of my hand dexterity issues, or maybe I walk with my feet turned in due to another condition, but they can't see that I can't do math. So a lot of times people will see me and they'll say, well, you don't look like you're disabled or you're making it up. And I'm indeed not. I mean, some are visible, some aren't.
Mhm.
Disabilities are visible, others are not visible. I also think that sometimes people think, well, you have a bachelor's degree. You must have overcame your disability. And the truth is, I'm not going to overcome my disability. It's a part of who I am in my life. I also think sometimes people hear the term learning disability and they think, oh, she can't learn. And I can learn. It's just I might have to do it a different way. It might take me longer to process information. And sometimes people hear learning disabilities and they think, well, you must not be able to read. I remember I was at the caseworker's office before, and I said, oh, I have a learning disability. And she was reading the information to me. I said, why are you reading this? She goes, oh, you said you had a learning disability. I assumed you couldn't read. And I can read,
Mm.
just don't ask me to do the math. That's
Right.
where we're going to have the issue at.
Yeah, there seems to be a lot of misunderstanding about learning disabilities.
Mhm. I agree, definitely. And especially dyscalculia. A lot of people have never heard of that.
Mm.
Most people have heard of dyslexia. And when also I talk about visual perception, everybody says, oh, get a pair of glasses, or it must be with your eyes. And it's not really with my eyes, it's with my brain.
Right. So is the visual perception issue, is that why you can't drive?
Yes, I
Okay.
have, it's also part of the dyscalculia as well, not being able to drive. I'll confuse my left from my right and I blink whenever things come at me. I can remember, and I'll trip on air. And I can remember gym class was a nightmare for me when I was growing up. I like doing non-competitive fitness. I do that every day, but I just am not good at team sports. And my parents knew that, okay, this is going to be a challenge. So they had me wait a year instead of when I was 16 to try to get my license. We decided we were going to wait a bit. And I lived down in the country, and my one of the first tasks they wanted me to do was to mow the field with the riding lawnmower. And instead of making straight, perfect, beautiful lines, I ended up making circles. So I always say I know where crop circles come from because I that's what they look like. And then they thought, okay, well, let's have you try to go up the driveway. And luckily, my mom was in the car with me, or I would have wrecked into the family garage at that point. And after that, my parents knew something was going on, that we needed to just get to see if this was going to be a possibility. And at a rehabilitation hospital, they they performed a driver's license assessment if I could do that. And I passed a lot of things. I knew what to happen if you had a flat tire. I knew the responsibilities of having a vehicle, and it was all great until we got to the end with, oh, my vision was fine. And then when we got to the end, they did a visual perception test, and then they said it was so low. They said, we, based on this, we can't recommend that you get your license.
Oh, I see.
So, and that was just the 100-pound weight that was lifted off of me, because that's something I worried about. I knew that I could fall. I knew I could run into, hurt myself, but I didn't want to go out there and risk that in a vehicle with other people.
Yeah. Good point. Yeah. So now having a chance to look back, what would you tell that younger version of yourself who was struggling with learning disability and trying to fit in socially and just feeling just bummed out with life? What would you tell her?
I would tell that person that things are going to get better. You're going to find a way in life, and you're going to be someone that's going to be able to achieve your dreams. And I would also tell her that you're going to find that tribe of people. It doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. And I would also love to reassure that person that success doesn't always come in the package that you expect. Sometimes it comes in something even better.
Right. And then earlier you mentioned that you went through a little bit of bullying in school.
Yes.
So with you having a learning disability and then having to go through this horrible experience of bullying, who did you turn to in that dark time of your life? Who was the most influential person to you during that time?
The most influential person was when I started going with my writing group with adults that were a couple years older than I was. That really influenced a lot because I had that acceptance. So whenever my other people were out on the weekends at my age hanging out, I wasn't sitting at home by myself. I had a lot of my friends who were picking me up that were a couple years older than I was, already out of school. And a lot of my other peers were like, well, why aren't you driving? And that really wasn't a question with them. Maybe a little bit in the beginning, but they picked me up. They accepted me, and I was part of that group. So that really made me feel connected. My parents were also really there for me too. They made sure that I had a ride to go to places, and they listened to me, and they tried to give a lot of advice, and just they kept really reassuring me that things are going to get better, and that your school is not the whole world, and just a lot of that encouragement.
I just want to applaud you because with learning disabilities and you just kind of push forward and you found your
Mhm.
way and you got a bachelor's degree and you're the example of resilience, right?
Thank you so
Yeah.
much.
And so now I want to shift a little bit to your work. You say you're a paraeducator in a school for students with disabilities. What kind of disabilities do they have? Can you clarify a little bit?
Sure. I work with students that in a public school. Some have disabilities and some don't. Some of our students that I see that I do work with are in a general ed classroom, and they have some of them have learning disabilities. Some are specific learning disabilities. Others have attention deficit disorder. Some of them also have autism as well. And there are a couple also in our building. We have a self-contained classroom for students that have multiple disabilities, and we have a self-contained for ones that have intellectual disabilities, and for those who have a classroom for those who have autism. So we get a wide range. And then we also have
Right.
students too that might have other health impairments that maybe don't qualify for having an individualized education plan, but they still need to have services. Some of that can include asthma, diabetes. Sometimes we might get a student that comes in, they might have a broken leg or a broken arm, and they might need some assistance in the room with certain things.
Right.
So we see a wide range of students with disabilities.
Okay. What trends are you noticing in children with disabilities at your workplace?
Right. The one I forgot to mention too is emotional support. I see a lot of students that come in. Autism is definitely one of our big ones that we get a lot of kids that come in, a lot of learning disabilities. Those are the big ones that can come in. Sometimes it's also emotional support students too, like with behavior issues. Sometimes that comes in. The
Mm-hmm.
lesser known ones are visual impairment and being deaf and hard of hearing.
Okay. Wow. My heart goes out to those children. I think,
Mhm.
I think they're going through so much, but it's going to make them very strong people. So let's talk a little bit about your photography.
Yes.
And I know you say you have a lot of articles published on several platforms. So how did you get into photography and writing?
Well, I knew like writing was definitely my first thing they found out that I was really good at. When I was really young, I can remember I loved stories. My dad would read to me every night, and I loved to write. And my dad found a story about a dinosaur that I wrote in second or third grade. And he said, "Wow, this is pretty good." And that just encouraged me to write more because I didn't think I was good at anything. And writing became my world. I could write about my feelings, I could write about my thoughts, and that was really it's always been therapeutic for me because I could figure a lot of those things out when I wrote. And the photography, that kind of came as a surprise. I can remember I didn't think I was artistic, and a lot of people would say, "Oh yeah, people with learning disabilities, they're artistic," and I couldn't draw a straight line. And I took a picture at prom, and it was of a tree at our venue. And my peers looked at it and said, "Why'd you take a picture of a tree?" And when I went and I showed it to one of the older women in my writing group, she goes, "This shows perspective."
Uh-huh.
And I
Nice.
didn't know it at that time. And I put that on the shelf for a number of years. And then I was at a family wedding in Rhode Island, and we went to a cemetery in one of the New England states, and they had these beautiful angels. And I took
Mm.
this picture, and I had a friend that saw it, and she was very particular about things. And she said, "Wow, these are amazing." And I thought, "Oh, if she likes this, that I might be onto something." And I put them in an art show, and I got an honorable mention. And that just encouraged me to enter more of my photography into shows and to take more pictures, and just to be able to have a little store on my blog where I can sell them.
So talk a little bit about your blog. Okay, hang on, before we get to your blog, I want to ask you, are you thinking about writing a book
I would
about
love
your
to write a
journey?
book. Yes,
Yeah.
I would love to do that, comparing my life with the life cycle of a butterfly, because I also love butterflies too, and just that transformation
Oh, yeah.
that I went through. And I would also like to do a couple books about dyscalculia, children's books, because I don't think there's a lot of information about dyscalculia.
Yeah, yeah, that would be a great idea. So yeah, let's get into your blog and talk about your blog and where can people find you if they want to connect with you?
Sure. My blog, I write a lot about my learning disability and just life with having one in general. And I try to do a lot of nature and try to do metaphors with that. My latest blog post is about my life with a learning disability. It's when you hit a rough patch. And I try to use just hitting that rough patch with gardening of just sometimes some of the rough patches that I've hit in my life and the hope that's with that. I also have my photography where people can purchase prints and other things on my store. And I also have a disability forum where people with disabilities are able to connect. And my website is michellesmission.net.
Okay. So are you on social media?
Yes, I am. I'm on Facebook and Instagram as well.
Okay, so what's your handle then on Facebook and Instagram?
I would have to, I can put a call, I can give you the handle to that because yeah, it's pretty long.
Oh,
And
okay.
then Instagram is Steiner 7250. Yep.
Okay, got it. So we have a couple minutes left, so let me ask you a signature closing question that I have for all my guests. What is your closing message for humanity to help in our collective healing and empowerment?
What I would just love to tell people is that life, sometimes your biggest failures can often lead to some of your biggest successes, and just keep on going forward with that.
Oh, I love that. And that is so true. So, Michelle, thank you so much for joining us here today and for sharing your empowering story. I think you're such an inspiration. So, I'm glad you're sharing your story and your message of resilience and empowerment. So, thank you so much. And for everybody who's watching and listening, thank you for your time. And until next time, bye for now.